All right, today I want to talk about a subject called deep work. It's from a book of that title, Deep Work. This is the first book I've read in a long time. I actually don't even know if I've ever done this, but I read the book twice in a row, cover to cover. The first time I read it, it really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and a lot of it for me was on the business side of things, but this whole concept and everything can apply to literally every aspect of your life. And I think it's especially important in the time we're living in now. So right now, if you really think about the world that we live in, it's incredibly distracting. I mean, there's a lot of fucking shit out there that's like trying to get your attention. So if you look at, social media, video games, text messages, emails, endless notifications on your phones, dings and fucking shit from apps and all this kind of stuff, everybody's trying to get your attention. Everybody's trying to get, or all these companies are trying to get you to look at whatever shit that they have. So one of the reasons for that is because right now, the most valuable commodity on the planet is data, and it's mainly your personal data. So if you think about all of this shit that you look at on social media and all of that kind of stuff, it's collecting your personal data in order to put advertising in front of you. So if you look at it from that standpoint, these social media platforms, they make money off of advertising. So they want to collect your data to find out what you want to see. And then they want to put those ads in front of you. And then the companies that are advertising to you will want to use it more because it'll be more effective. So if you think about that, if the social media platforms are some of the biggest companies on earth, or at least Facebook is for, I don't know where they rank, but I know they're, definitely one of the biggest, but I don't know. There's probably some fucking crazy companies we never heard of that are bigger. But anyway, the amount of money that they can generate off of this advertising is huge. So they have a lot of incentive and a lot of money to play with in order to create these algorithms, these sort of addictive dopamine release type of things in their scrolling and all this kind of stuff, showing you things you want to see. There's like push notifications, and then there's this whole thing of like, fear of missing out. So you don't want to miss some important update, or you don't want to miss all this shit. It's all this stuff that's kind of built in to everything that those things are doing. So with all that stuff in mind, we're sort of becoming more and more addicted to this kind of distraction. And that's one of the things this book, Deep Work, talks about. And it says things like if you find yourself in line, if you have to wait for a few minutes in line, are you pulling out your phone to look at shit? That's a sheer sign that you are addicted to this kind of thing, whether it's mild or severe. I personally am 100% that person. And this book has gotten me to really start to think about that kind of stuff. So I was actually talking to the guy on Toy Division podcast, great podcast if you haven't checked him out. And I was telling him about that, and he was like, "Oh yeah, that's addiction." Because I was telling him, when I moved to Vegas, the stoplights are so fucking long here. It's crazy. Like, you're going to be sitting there for a couple minutes if you get to a red light. So I was telling him, I said, when I would stop at a stoplight, the first thing I would do is grab my phone. Like, I don't look at my phone while I'm driving, but if I'm stuck at a stoplight, that's what I do. I grab my phone and I look at shit, and that's not good. I mean, it's not good to sort of feel that compulsion to distract yourself. Like, there's something to be said about being able to sit quietly and not do anything. I mean, you don't have to have this device. This device it's an amazing piece of technology. You have all this information at your fingertips, and there's all these great things that you can do with it. But at the same time, if you're reaching for it every time you have to stand somewhere for a couple minutes, there's a problem there. There's a serious problem there. And the book even talks about embracing boredom and I don't know how old you are, whoever it is that's listening, but I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and so it was a long time before any of this shit happened. And I barely remember even, like, I remember what we did, but at the same time, it's hard to remember, like, how did we occupy our time during those little minutes of standing in line or whatever. I mean, I guess we just thought about things. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm getting a little off track. So to get into this, I wanted to give you an example. I used to be in a constant state of deep work when I was primarily focused on doing design for a living. So this was before, I mean, social media was kind of around, but it wasn't nearly as much as significant as it is now. So there wasn't really all of these algorithms and all this kind of stuff. So it wasn't nearly as distracting. We had text messaging. We had instant messenger was kind of a big thing at the time. So the distractions were definitely there, but at the same time, we weren't quite as accustomed to reaching for something all the time. And so when I was reading this book, I was thinking about how I would spend several hours, blocks of hours at a time in a constant state of deep work when either I'm working on a project or I'm learning a new piece of software. I remember I wanted to learn about this thing called particle simulation. It's a little bit out there to really get into it, but it's a way that 3D software can simulate how water works. So it's incredibly complicated and it's very time consuming to learn. It's very time consuming to use. There was one point where I decided I want to learn that. And I spent several days of just waking up in the morning and sitting down and fucking with that all day long. I don't even remember, like, I think I just even stopped to eat and then that was it. Or I even ate in front of the computer and just kept learning. There's something about kind of pushing yourself outside of what you're normally comfortable doing that gets you into that state of deep work. And it's also getting into the flow state, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later. So anyway, being into that state of deep work was actually very normal for me at the time. And when I was comparing to how I am now, it's very, very different. Like, I have a hard time staying on task for any amount of time. So I've been trying to train myself to block out time and say, you know, I can't do anything else other than whatever this task is. And I've been finding it's making me happier when I do that. I have to admit, I have taken my foot off the gas in this department a little bit, but especially now that I'm recording this episode, I'm going to be exploring it again and bringing, like, I'm not completely off of it, but I just haven't been as disciplined as I was when I first really started getting into this. So about the idea that you'll be happier, this is another thing that they talked about in the book. They gave some examples of people that worked these very mundane jobs, which was like, I think one guy was working on an assembly line where he was like soldering some chip into something. I don't remember what it was, maybe a piece of computer equipment or sound equipment or something like that. And so while that's a very boring job on the surface, when you really think about it, he's doing the same task over and over and over again. He basically solders and attaches the same piece all day long. And so you would think there's no way to get any kind of enjoyment out of that, but he started creating some challenges for himself, and he would time himself to see how fast he can get each one done, you know, and it was like a challenge. So a little further along in this conversation, I'm going to talk more about the flow state, but part of the way you get into that is to push yourself a little bit beyond your current capacity. And so that's what he ended up doing. So he was doing that, and he found that he was enjoying his work because every single piece that was coming down the line was a challenge for him, and he would challenge himself to beat his time. All that ended up benefiting him in another way because he was doing way better at his job. He ended up building up more skills because he was challenging himself, and then he ended up getting promoted and doing all these other things. So there's another side benefit, but the whole point of that was mainly that he found happiness in a mundane job because he was in a state of deep work while he was doing it. So even if your job is filled with these mundane tasks all day long, you know, you got to be there anyway. So there's a way to find some kind of happiness and some kind of satisfaction in the job. Like, even if you're digging holes all day, you could find ways to be more efficient in how you're digging them, make them nicer, whatever that is. I don't dig holes for a living, so I don't really know, but I'm assuming if you really tried, you can find little aspects to it. And I'm going to get into some art and graffiti stuff here in a minute. I'm just trying to set all this stuff up. So, and that when I was reading about that, it reminded me about my first career. I was doing offset printing, which is basically running these like small printing machines. We'd print like forms and, envelopes and business cards and shit like that. And it's kind of a boring job, but at the same time, I enjoyed doing it because I was always fighting, and obviously I wasn't aware of this whole concept at the time. This was I started that in 1991. I wasn't even really a reader at the time. So, I mean, this book I don't think was even written then. But anyway, I remember I was always trying to find ways to get better, ways to do my job better, ways to set up the environment in a way that was more efficient. I was always trying to keep the press really clean and running really well and well maintained. And I remember I would have these like side projects where I would like take a component off of the press that was like extra dirty from years and years of never getting a deep clean, and found like a great deal of satisfaction in getting that piece back to close to new look. And what is the word I'm trying to say? I'm kind of stumbling. Just getting all the grime off and getting it like oiled and everything's just like really smooth and clean and all that stuff. There was just ways to find satisfaction in a job that really wasn't all that exciting. You're basically getting the printer set up, and then the printer's just running sheets, and you're pulling out every so many sheets to make sure there's no weird shit going on. And that was basically your whole job. But I was able to really enjoy the job because of that kind of stuff. And so fast forward to where I'm at now, as I was saying, like I'm in this constant state of distraction, and it's very hard for me to really stay on a task. Like back when I was doing motion graphics, I could stay on task for like 12 hours straight, aside from taking restroom breaks and eating. But I was pretty much focused on that task. And so nowadays it's, carving out an hour is kind of challenging. Like even a half an hour sometimes. I mean, granted, my life is more complicated now because I have a team, and my current business is more complicated than that business was. So I have a lot more things to answer to. So there are some reasons for it, but at the same time, I don't believe that that's the main reason why I'm not in that state anymore. I think it's more that I've allowed myself to transition over, or let this sort of addiction of being constantly distracted build up to the point where it's pretty hard to stay focused on one thing and not really like pick up my phone while the computer's doing something or whatever's happening. It's hard for me to not jump from one task to another because I've sort of rewired my brain to be that's my normal operating state. And so getting into this deep work thing, I'm really trying to shift that back over. And obviously you could be way more productive by doing it that way, but also you actually end the day happier when you aren't allowing yourself to get constantly distracted. I have a general understanding of, I believe I have an understanding of how this whole dopamine thing works. And, the more you get it, the more you get it, the more you want it. It's kind of the way that you get addicted to anything, drugs or anything that you can get addicted to. That's part of the process. So by allowing yourself to get distracted all the time by these sort of things that are created, like social media is one, your brain's going to want to keep doing that stuff. It's going to keep seeking that stuff. So I've kind of gotten myself to the point where I have to do some repairs, some rewiring to get myself back to the point where I can stay in the state of deep work for longer periods of time. And so when I realized looking at the phone is really one of my biggest issues, I started blocking out my whole day. I would literally block every single thing out, and I would block in, or not block, but I would only put specific times when I can check my phone, and they were a limited amount of time. The way that it worked, and since I run my business social media, it's a little bit different than maybe if I was looking at it for just because I want to see what's going on. Not that I don't do that from time to time, but the way that I was setting this up, these times when I could check my social media were pretty limited. So I really only had enough time to go in and check for messages on the machine account, make sure nobody had any questions, reply to some comments on our posts, different sort of maintenance things like that. And then I was back off and back into the work that I was trying to do. And so after the first couple days of doing that, I remember one day when I got home, I had worked a good solid 12 hours and I was working the whole day and I was happy. I was energized. I was still ready to go. At the same time, part of this whole deep work thing is to shut off at the end of the day. There's a shutdown ritual. I don't know if I talked about that at any point, but maybe I can just touch on it real quick. What the book was talking about, how at the end of your workday, you should have a ritual that you do every day. So it's a list of things that you do. And then what the guy did in his thing, he would actually say, one of the last tasks on his shutdown ritual was to verbally say, shutdown complete. And that was like the cue for himself or his brain to know that's it. Work is done. I'm going to go home or wherever he was going. And that was going to be the end of it until the next day. And so I even do that as well. I have my own little ritual of tasks I need to get done to make sure everything's in order. I check my email, I check my calendar, I check the comments and messages on our social media to make sure no customers are trying to get in touch with me. And I write my list of tasks for the next day. And then I was like, hey man, if it works for this guy, I'm going to do it too. So I have in my list to say shutdown complete. And so I've been doing that every day. I think I'm about 30 days in. I have taken if I did, rarely I take a day off, but when I do that, sometimes I don't do that whole thing. But anyway, so let's get into talking about graffiti and art and how this kind of stuff can help, because I've talked a lot about this in career and business and shit like that. But, we've all experienced it when we're painting and you sort of get into the zone, you everything starts hitting, or maybe you're sort of like trying something new and you're getting excited about seeing progress. I mean, think about those times when you're drawing or when you're painting or something like that, and something happens that you're like, oh shit, I've never done that before. And then you start exploring that and you're kind of just outside of your comfort zone, but it's actually looking good. That's one easy way to really get into the state of deep work, because you want to keep exploring that. And that's another way that you get into the flow state. I wasn't really aware of this whole concept up until recently, but I've never really enjoyed those kind of paint sessions where there's all these like lawn chairs and coolers and people are drinking and all. It's kind of like a party and there's painting going on. Like, that's cool if that's what you like to do, but I've never liked doing that. I always found it really distracting, and I think it's because it's hard to get into that state of deep work when you're constantly walking around and talking to people, or people are coming up to talk to you while you're painting and you're stopping and starting and going back, and your piece ends up taking much longer than normal. But also, the longer you stay on task without stopping, the more likely you're going to really get into this state of deep work, and then also get into the flow state where everything starts to come together. The flow state can be a little complicated to talk about. I haven't really studied it that much. I have looked into it, but it's kind of like, the sports people, you hear them talking about it. They're in the zone or something like that. And it's like nothing else is happening other than this sport that they're playing. So that's the flow state. So you get into that all the time, I'm sure, when you're painting. So during these sort of party things where it's all distracting, there's people all over the place and there's music, and it's more of a social gathering than a really focused paint session. I personally don't like that. Not saying that it's a good thing or a bad thing to do. I just personally like getting into that state of flow when I'm painting. I think the work for me comes out better. So I don't know, take that for what you want. I mean, if you like doing that stuff, that's cool. So outside of that, if you're a way you can kind of incorporate this deep work thing into your art or your graph, you could say, I'm going to spend a certain amount of time, whether it's 2 hours, an hour, even 30 minutes or whatever. Let's say you wanted to just, draw in your black book or do a painting or a drawing at home. If you set a timer on your phone and say, I'm only going to do this task for this amount of time, and I'm not going to use my phone, I'm not going to look at anything, I'm not going to check social media, I'm just going to focus 100% on this task. that's a good way to get into that deep work state, because you've sort of like committed to this amount of time. This is all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do anything else. I'm not going to get up and walk around. I'm just going to sit there and get into this. And so if you do that, I think at the end of that session, you're going to find that you're going to have a little bit more of a feeling of accomplishment. You may actually have created something that's outside of what you would normally do. I don't know. There's a whole lot of different reasons for doing it. But in my opinion, one of the best reasons for it, especially if you're in the sort of state that I'm in, which is like this kind of heavily distracted sort of state, by just practicing, forcing yourself to do that, you're actually building up a very valuable skill that you can apply literally anywhere. You can apply it to your career. You can especially apply it to your relationships. I mean, think about how distracted we are. Like, I don't have kids, but I remember a while back, it was like right around the time when people were really on their phones a lot. Like when smartphones had apps now, and like you would really see, like nowadays, it's like, it's weird to not see a bunch of people on their phones. But I remember this was around the time when it was like really starting to catch on. And I was sitting in a restaurant waiting for a pickup order for my food. And I saw a dad sitting with his kid, and the dad was just glued to his phone the whole time. And his kid was just like distracting himself with just whatever was in front of him. He didn't have any toys. He didn't have anything, but he was kind of like messing with things on the table and kind of fidgeting around. And I remember feeling a little bit sad. And I was like, man, that guy's missing out on what's going on in front of him, And so I find myself thinking about that a lot when I'm with my girlfriend or with my dogs or something like that, and I'm sitting there with my phone. There's nothing on my phone that's more important than that girl or those dogs. Like, there's nothing, So allowing myself to sit there and not be in the moment, these moments that you're not going to have, they're not guaranteed. You don't know how many of these you're going to have. Like, I got a dog that I don't even know how the fuck he's still going. He's like 20 something years old. He's still rocking, Like, why would I distract myself scrolling through shit that other people are posting and not soak up every minute that I can with this dog? You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. It's like, so the whole concept can be applied to anything: relationships, your business, your career. It can improve anything you want to use it for. It can be used to improve that thing. Because in the same thing I was talking about with the social media and all that stuff, how your attention is super valuable, your attention is also super valuable in every single thing in your life. Everything that's worth doing is worth your attention, obviously. I mean, if you're sitting there letting all this distraction that's built to get your attention so that they can make money off of you. Look, I'm not even going to hate on it, because I run ads for my business, so I use this shit too. I'm not saying that it's not. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how to really take a stance on that. I mean, it's a valuable thing for a business to be able to use that, but at the same time, we have to be able to turn this stuff off and be able to focus on our lives. Because like I was saying, your attention is the most valuable thing in any task that you're doing, whether it's your job, whether it's sitting with your significant other or your kids or your dogs or your pets, whatever the fuck. That's shit is, your attention is more valuable there than it is to be scrolling through TikTok videos or Instagrams or whatever the fuck. All right, so that's most of what I have. I have a couple action steps here that I just wanted to throw out. So number one, I've already mentioned this, but I'll say it again. You can choose an activity, set a timer, and only do that activity. So whether it's drawing, whether it's spending time with your family, whatever that is, you commit to a certain amount of time that you can only do that one thing. It's really a very simple thing, but I think out of all of this shit, it's probably one of the most effective things to really just set a timer and say, you know what, this is all 100% of my attention is going on this, and that's it. And then when the timer goes off, then you can make a decision. Do you want to keep doing that, or do you want to go off and get distracted? Whatever. As long as you put in that time, you honor that commitment that you made to yourself over that period of time, and you try to do that consistently and make that part of your routine, I think you're going to find a huge amount of value in that, because there's so many other things outside of everything that we've talked about that skill is going to help. I can't really talk too much about it, but there's like some shit about going on, what is it? Like a dopamine detox or some shit like that, because we're so accustomed to this, and that shit can kind of wear out. So there's a lot of benefits to this. So number 2, this one's about trying to get into the flow state. So try to find something just outside of your skill level. So you can either do that in learning something new, like I was saying when I was trying to learn that piece of software, or it could be, in your graph career, you could just force yourself to learn something that's outside of your comfort zone. There may have been maybe a style that you've always looked at and just thought you couldn't do. Maybe try to do that number 1 activity of forcing yourself to commit to doing that and just say, I'm just going to spend 2 hours and really try to make this happen. And you may be surprised that things that you don't think you have the talent or the capacity to do, you may actually be able to do it. And you may see a lot of benefit from that. But the other thing, one of the ways they say to get into the flow state is to be operating just outside of your current capacity. So they say it should be something that you have enough skill level to be able to do, but just push it just a little further so that you're still kind of making mistakes and still progressing outside. You're not like stuck in your comfort zone. Like a lot of us writers know the feeling of drawing, and you're sort of drawing the same letters that you've always drawn. So you're not learning anything. You're not pushing yourself past any capacity. It's still maybe fun to do, and you still may like doing it. But if you push it just a little bit further and get yourself just outside of that comfort zone, you're creating the opportunity to enter that flow state. And then when you enter the flow state, it's like time becomes really irrelevant. Like it's sort of strange. And I think everybody's experienced this, but like time could either be sped up where, say, you've spent like 4 hours doing something and it really feels like 1 hour has passed. It could also be the opposite, where you're like doing so much that you've like, maybe you've made this super complex design and you're like, fuck, I've probably been working on this for like 6 hours, but it turns out you've only been working on it for like an hour or two. Those are all like symptoms, or I don't know if symptoms is the right word, but those are all like aspects of the flow state where time kind of you just get so focused on what you're doing. So obviously there's a lot of benefits to learning how to get yourself into that flow state too. So that's another action step that I think would be helpful. So try to find something just outside of your skill level. So anyway, that's all I got. I really appreciate your time. I hope this is helpful to you. And if it is, please share the show. I'm trying to grow this thing, so I could use some help in that regard. So tell somebody about it. Throw it up on your stories or whatever you want to do. I'd appreciate it. All right. Later. All right.
Appreciate each and every one of you guys who are supporting the cause and continue to spread the love. And yeah, stay up.